The concept of a company kind of putting out a 2.0 of an action figure in the 1/6 scale community is sort of teetering on becoming a meme at this point, considering that we're starting to see an influctuation of those concepts of revisiting older figures, kind of fixing things that were problematic at the time, and then delivering a much better quality product. I think this is probably a good time to say that the Arkham-verse is probably a good well for Hot Toys to revisit. Case in point, Batman himself from the Arkham-verse. As you can kind of see before you here, I happen to own both the Arkham City and Arkham Knight versions of Batman. These are their vanilla versions, so to speak, because I know that this guy has already been done to death a handful of times with different suits, skins, color swaps, etc. But no, this is the original Arkham Knight version with this V8 point something. I can't remember the exact numbers for this specific mark of the suit. But then here we have the Arkham City version. Note that there's no exact actual Arkham Asylum version, so again, that's still another potential checkbox to fulfill from Hot Toys, especially where we're at now, and especially after demonstrating exactly why it is that Arkham, or at least Hot Toys, should revisit the Arkham series because of the exhibits that are presented before you here. And I'm talking about strictly Batman, because I understand that right now, even Hot Toys themselves still has not let go of the property of Arkham Knight, or Arkham as a whole, considering that recently they revealed the Nightwing figure, which, I gotta be honest, does kind of give that vibe that they probably lost a blueprint somewhere in the headquarters on a computer or on a hard drive, and finally somebody dug it up and said, hey, we should probably release this, especially since we're kind of a little bit dry in regards to property acquisition and waiting for certain movies to come out and things like that. And I feel like, aside from some of those secondary characters, actually giving the Arkham version of Batman a 2.0 or 3.0 some kind of revision is very much overdue, because take this Arkham City version for example. Whether they want to directly revisit Arkham City and give it a proper remaster slash 2.0, or maybe do a 1.0 of the original Arkham Asylum, because at that point it starts to get a little nebulous in regards to what you're really dealing with as far as differences. Maybe the color scheming is a little bit different between the Asylum and the City versions, but in regards to maybe like the texture work and the paneling and the overall design of the suit, it's arguably the same, except for maybe some nuances changed up on the gauntlets, the boots, and most notably the utility belt. It's a bit more squared off from the compartments on the sides versus the much more angular, slightly circled or curved edges towards the bottom of the utility belt. But apart from that, you're effectively dealing with the same suit. So at that point, you can kind of kill off two birds with one stone. Hell, maybe some kind of deluxe version that lets you swap out pieces for being able to kind of change them from the Asylum versions to the City version, since those differences are also marginal in the first place. But that's mainly wishful thinking on my part of things that can admittedly simply just be a luxury. It simply could just be like a deluxe accommodation. What truly needs to happen is for Hot Toys to simply just take all of the different practices and methods that they've applied to recent action figures, whether they're pulled from live action properties like the MCU or video game related stuff or even Netflix television stuff, and just incorporate it into a proper, much better cleaned up Arkham version of Batman from those first two games where he was dealing with a much more simpler suit. Because here you have a really great fundamental kickoff point with the way that the suit is textured, with the rubberized sort of feel to the musculature, predominantly around the shoulders, the biceps, the legs, and even a little bit of the chest area. I really love how the bat symbol sort of grafted on there, and the visual representation of the abdomen with the shading, as well as the little lines and the rivets to make the entirety of the armor feel very panelized around the thighs, the obliques, the biceps, like I mentioned before, on top of the shoulders. It feels like it's actually made up of a suit. But then you get to the actual feel of the gauntlets and the boots, or I should say the shells, so to speak, that kind of shift up and down, side to side, and feel incredibly cheap by today's Hot Toys standards. Especially when you start to get into the posability factor and you start to kind of mess around with the limbs, with the legs. The joints themselves feel pretty decent. They feel pretty okay, and they have a certain level of ratchetness to it to kind of hold and firm, except for the top legs. They have gotten loosed up over time. It has a little bit of difficulty standing. I'm kind of surprised that I was able to get it standing in this post nonetheless. And then again, once you kind of feel a little bit of the quality of the plastic for those gauntlets and the boots in hand, as soon as you get into the posability factor, and I even just noticed right now that the belt is already kind of riding up. I kind of wish that there was an added level of heft to the belt, which is pretty decently painted and textured in regards to the detail that they managed to apply to it. But it's just, again, that quality, that life expectancy, that those standards that Hot Toys has been able to kind of escalate, that this guy is just so far removed from them that to see a proper Arkham Asylum and Arkham City representation done in a 2.0 variety would just be chef's kiss, especially to kind of bring about, like I said, added quality work for the paint decals to kind of give it maybe a little bit of an airbrush to the gauntlets, maybe have some alternate hands that kind of have this sort of weathered look. And speaking of weathered and tattered, I understand that one of the big attractive details and one of those really cool quality of life things to make those games really prestigious is the whole concept, the very lived in concept of how the suit sort of deteriorates and takes battle damage or combat damage over time, especially since those first two games, or rather all three of the Arkham trilogy games, take place all in one night. So again, this can kind of lean a little bit towards that personal wishful thinking desire checklist that I'm kind of concocting in my brain, but it would be nice if maybe there were some pieces of the chest bar that they can maybe hide some of the seams, because I know that sometimes Hot Toys is a little 50-50 in regards to hiding seams for swappable parts. I know recently they announced like that new deck figure from Predator Badlands, and some people were kind of remarking on how visible the seam is for the mandibles when you swap them. So maybe they could do something that is a little bit more cleverly hidden, especially with some of those panels that you can kind of see from the shoulder lines and underneath the pecs where the abs meet up. You can have like a swappable piece that shows a little bit of that damage and some of those scratches that he takes on the chest, on the bicep. And then when in regards to that cape, look at this before you're here. It's made out of this like pleather material that thankfully has not weathered in the years that I have owned this guy, but at the same time, it's so loose and low quality that it feels like almost something that came off of a Party City costume. And in regards to it not even having any kind of wiring embedded into it, it's become a bit of a standard, a staple, so to speak, almost a requirement for caped or even coated characters or action figures that Hot Toys has put out in recent times to have some kind of wiring incorporated into it, so that it can at least have some kind of posability, some kind of quality of life presentation added to it, especially when you display it up on your shelf. So that needs to make some sort of comeback should there be a revisit to this version. But along with that, again, to add some extra points to maybe kind of give it that self-fulfilling title of possibly being a deluxe version and maybe make the money worth it, come with a secondary cape that has that designed battle damage with like some of the cuts that he's got on the right side of the wing, maybe some tatterings happening on the outer lining of the cape on the left side. You name it, just kind of give it this added weather damaged look to make it look like this is Batman at the end of either of those respective games. Now, that's not to say that this original version was like a complete loss or anything like that. Like I said, at the time, that was our only option. Hell, it's kind of our only option right now in this 6-scale format. And I would argue that maybe on the side, it would probably just be a third party, and then maybe if you want to kind of spruce up the foundation of what Hot Toys was providing here, you can maybe go to a third party to give you like an alternate head sculpt. Though that's where I think maybe I will provide a little bit of contention, because I truly do think that this head sculpt for this original Arkham City, Arkham Asylum version was actually not too bad. I would just argue that maybe the technicalities of the skin tone, the paint applications to make it look a bit more lifelike and a little bit more photorealistic to how it looked like in the game could be a bit refined. But in terms of the actual design and sculpt work for not just the cowl, the elongated ears, the much more thicker sized head that he had going on in that game, to the point where I'm thinking to myself, like, how massive, how much of an absolute unit Rocksteady's version of Batman truly was. I feel like Hot Toys kind of lived up to that reputation with that head sculpt. If anything, the only thing they do need to clean up a little bit would probably just be a little bit of the expressions provided on both the original mouth plate and this alternate mouth plate with the grimace. Again, just kind of harkening back to those quality of life improvements with the paint applications and the actual detail work. But in terms of sculpt, it's not bad. Again, this could just simply just take those original blueprints and just use them as a stepping stone for just to kind of escalate the quality there from where they're known as right now. And I guess in that regard, you can also apply some of those quality of life improvements on the gadgetry, which the selection in and of itself is not bad. Of course, you got the iconic staples for Arkham Batman to have him on person, whether it be the grapple, the zipliner, the gel gun, the batarangs, of course, the very specific style to those batarangs. But one of the things that kind of set Hot Toys apart with those gadgets would have to be how some of them are a little bit on the modular side. They got a little bit more modular and in depth in regards to how many pieces you kind of swap out for some of these like grapple pieces. But when they kind of started things off, they only had one option to swap it to, but still carry that over, don't abandon it, and you would probably still have a really good thing going on in terms of accessories for what you're packing inside of the box. But like I said, in terms of what I personally would like to see in some kind of deluxe revisit / 2.0, modular pieces to then swap it between the Asylum and City version. That would be dope. Battle damaged pieces so that then you can have him look weathered and all tattered up like he did at the end of either of those games. And frankly, you will have my money for a very definitive version from that original 2009 to 2011 era of Rocksteady Batman. Or I guess you could argue the Paul Dini era of Rocksteady Batman, because as soon as Dini left, his absence was truly felt when Batman Arkham Knight came about. We went with a darker tone, things got a little bit more somber, and then they also got a little bit more technical or technology based, I should say, in regards to the approach of the new mechanized V8.0419, whatever that terminology was called. But basically the Arkham Knight suit that was taking on a much more armorized approach, as you can kind of see right here. And this is the Hot Toys version. I would almost argue that if you were to ask me, gun to my head, which one I would prefer in regards to what's the current output right now by Hot Toys, it would honestly be the original Arkham Asylum, Arkham City version, because this Arkham Knight, as the years went on, I kind of learned a little to dislike it more and more. On paper, you would think that Hot Toys approaching the metal panels, the shoulder guards, all of the different mechanized bits, it would practically be a good like marriage of those two sort of styles. But there's just something very sticky and sort of just complicated about this suit that practically renders the entire thing a few years later almost like a 1/6 scale, slightly articulated statue, especially when you're dealing with a little bit of the mid-torso range, the legs. Yeah, there's some mobility found there, but you'll notice just how much, like I said, that quality of plastic still feels a little bit cheap in regard compared to some of the standards that we've raised since then. But when you're dealing with a very mechanized approach to the style of the suit, you're dealing with an awful lot of very glossy, very sticky plastic, especially not just for the gauntlets and the boots themselves, which I will argue have some added heft and feel, technically speaking, a little bit better than what they did on the original Arkham. They don't have that lightness to them, or at least not as strongly, but it's still present there. But to me, the biggest eyesore, the biggest just grievance that I have with the suit would have to be the plastic that's actually added to parts of the suit that you know for a fact inside of the lore of the game are not meant to be plastic. There's supposed to be much more softer materials on the suit, specifically all of the different very, what do they call it in the game? Like tri-weave mesh material happening on the thighs, or practically the entire top portions of the legs, a little bit around the obliques and the abdomen, and then predominantly around the biceps and the triceps of the arms, where you can see that it's almost like they just took a very simple cloth material and just grafted this very garish, reflective plastic or rubberized plastic on the surface. And that's it. And to me, it just looks incredibly ugly. We could probably use for a little bit more chrome material on the the utility belt, though I do appreciate the shade of yellow or shade of gold that they apply to it. That's kind of mimicking that of the in-game model. But then when you kind of navigate somewhere towards, like I said, the panels right there, the actual fidelity of the abdominal pieces, the little rivets and gears that you can kind of make out from the sides just underneath the bat wings, and to kind of have the symbol look like it can maybe stretch with a little bit of those like bands that's kind of connecting the chest to the shoulder guards, which again, paint applications are pretty nice for the most part, specifically on those shoulder guards. But at times, especially when you put them in a set light box or maybe some kind of detail display, you're gonna have a little bit too much of that reflective patterning that just makes it come off as a little too showy. And I know, I can already see people going down to the comments with their little keyboards and be like, it's called Hot Toys. Of course it's a toy. Because I'm gonna say it, he looks too much like a toy. And when you're spending $200 to $250, maybe even $300 now in regards to the average price of a 1/6 scale collectible figure, whether it be from Hot Toys, whether it be from InArt, or maybe some kind of third party that's sort of starting to come up on their own with the quality that they're providing, aka Lim Toys, who are also making their own video game action figures based on some of those properties. I don't own it, but the word on the street, in the 1/6 scale community street, would be that Uncharted for Nathan Drake is top tier. And if someone like Lim Toys can maybe take over the Arkham license somehow, which is never going to happen because it's WB and that's going to be a whole mess of legalities, legal hurdles that they're just going to have to jump across, it would be amazing if maybe they can take a whack at the Arkham-verse, specifically Arkham Knight, because we live in a time here in the year of our Lord 2025 where I think that the best action figure for Arkham Knight Batman comes from LPZZ at the 1/12 scale and not Hot Toys. That's when you know that they are overdue for a 2.0. Even with the head sculpt, which I think that they nailed the cowl, but the ears are just a little bit too, I don't want to say long, but because they look like about the same length as they did in the in-game model, but they're just a little too rounded to the point where they just don't have that added level of points that they had in the game, or that sharpness to them towards the very end. I don't know, there's something about them that I think are just a smidge shorter than that of the original Arkham Asylum here. There's just something about the head sculpts. I do appreciate the brow, because I understand that the brow was a little lower and a little less angled and kind of flatlined for this new version of the cowl that I noticed in my recent playthrough of the game. But then you also are dealing with a much pinkier sort of skin tone or approach to the flesh tone that they apply to the mouth plate that just doesn't sit well with me. And plus, he's looking a little bit too pouty, and as we kind of picked apart and observed, you'll notice that he's got a much wider mouth in this new Bruce Wayne character model that they incorporated in Arkham Knight versus that of the Arkham City or Arkham Asylum version. So the poutiness kind of makes a little bit more sense for the Asylum and City version, not so much for the Knight. And here, I feel like a little bit of cross DNA was happening with that likeness, that it could be better refined. But at least a few of, like, again, the strengths and the wheelhouse that Hot Toys is known for delivering on some of those sculpt work for like gears and machinery kind of moving about, is very strongly played out with the collar and neck piece, where you can see an awful lot of those machinations sort of coming alive a little bit in regards to that sculpt work. I just wish that, again, a little bit of that paint work would have been better applied, especially when you start to note that you have little, like I said, little nuances where you're like, what were they thinking applying to this? Mine in particular would just have to be a little bit of that blue undertone that's kind of riddling a little bit of the gauntlets and the boots, to where I'm like, I don't remember this blue ever appearing in the overall composition of the suit in game, unless I'm completely missing it, just like I was missing that specialized graph that he's got on the cape that I was saying was not present, only to then revisit the game and then realize that, yeah, it truly was right there. So that's my bad for not calling that out in the LPZZ 1/12 Arkham Knight Batman review. That's my bad. And that graph for this cape is also present, but I hate this cape. It's got this like applied rubberized plastic on the surface, similar to that of what we got going on the suit for the thighs and the biceps, as I mentioned before. And therefore, it makes this cape just feel like I'm pulling out a raincoat out of the bag that I haven't worn in like years. but the storm outside is just bad enough that I need to pull this thing out, and I'm about to spend another 10 or 15 goddamn minutes trying to unfold it, make sure that it's fully stretched out so I can comfortably wear it, and that's precisely what this cape looks like and feels like in hand. You can note right here that it's not even fully dispersed because just pulling it out of the box, it just, I wanted to demonstrate. I could do it, in like some separate B-roll inserts that you're going to see right here on screen. But prior to showing that off for you guys, I just wanted to demonstrate here in the talking head portion just how sticky and ugly and gross this cape feels to the point where it's sticking to the backside of the figure there. And you'll notice that it's not even dispersing, it's not waving. Kudos for them incorporating some wires as opposed to what we got going on in this version. But the wires are meaningless when you have that very ugly and gross feeling plastics. It's just encasing the entirety of the cloth cape to where it looks like it does like so. And it takes an extra amount of effort to get that thing to fully stretched out, to fully be complementary to the barely there posability of the figure, considering that, like I said, an awful lot of the torso and leg is sort of compromised via this, like I said, very gripping form of texture work happening on the cloth. That, again, so many things just come out as feeling a little bit frustrating with this original version, that I just kind of wish that instead of putting all of their efforts into dealing these like repaints, like the prestige version of Arkham Knight Batman, I can't remember the I can't remember what it was called, but it was like the red version, the one that's like all black with some accents of red, and then of course some complete remodels, some figures that aren't necessarily repaints, but they kind of overhauled a few of the sculpt work to kind of deliver on a much popular skin from the Arkham Knight game, like Batman Beyond, like recently with the Arkham Origins revisit of the XC suit, only all black and red. How about instead of dealing with that, you kind of go back to the fundamentals, the basics, and go to this original version and just study what LPZZ was able to do at the 1/12th and just do that for 1/6. You guys don't understand how much money you guys will make if you do that. And if you can at least bring those sensibilities back to, again, the accessories that are incorporated here, which are pretty reminiscent of the original version that you had with Arkham Asylum, only this time you are adding a couple of little things that are very centric and staple for the specific game of Arkham Knight, specifically the Disruptor. You even have that extra holographic plate to then add to one of the gauntlets, which I think could have had a different method or a different approach to it because it kind of curved the little tab. So putting it in is no problem. It's taking it out that it kind of becomes an issue to the point where I fear that I might break the little plastic tab at one point. And maybe also throwing in another mouth plate, although I do appreciate the inclusion of the Grimace face, but I just kind of wish that we had at least a third expression of some kind. I don't know exactly what kind of expression we could do with Batman from the Arkham series, considering that he's stoic for the majority of the time, and then maybe the only other exception would be a grimace or maybe like an inquisitive look. I don't know exactly what other things could be at play there, but I do appreciate having an extra Batarang, having the little pieces that come out of the zipline, though the wiring for those pieces could be a little bit better because they're way too loose and wobbly on this original version, and maybe we could kind of refine and add some much firmer wiring to those pieces. Apart from that, you can argue that there's more opportunity, more wishful thinking happening with the Asylum version. With Arkham Knight, it's strictly on the technical level because that's not where like my leniences or my biases towards the suit really lie. I really appreciate much more the simplistic approach to the original Rocksteady version from 2009 and 2011 respectively versus the Dini-less version of the suit here. But if you're going to do it, you got to do it right. And I feel like both of these guys are completely overdue for an overhaul, 2.0, revisit, remake, remaster, especially since Hot Toys is just predominantly in that market right now while they're waiting for this lull of brand new properties and brand new incarnations of figures to deliver from Marvel, DC, Star Wars. But man, oh man, how much I wish for them to not only go back to basics with Arkham as opposed to, like I said, having these like alternate skins, alternate versions of suits, secondary characters like Nightwing that are just a little bit too little too late. And I haven't even touched the surface in regards to some of those original classic characters from those first two games that either barely got touched by Hot Toys, like that Joker that is from the Asylum version, which is borderline a really great 1/6 scale Joker, could be maybe interpreted as a definitive Joker, but there's some problems with the stitching of the suit and some quality of life improvements over the gadgets included, or maybe the accessories. The hands are a little bit too on the big side. Maybe the articulation could be a little bit better because, like I said, I feel like the biggest problem with that Joker was the tailoring of the suits that could be most definitely better refined in today's age. And then combine that with just maybe finally giving us a Two-Face from that game, or maybe a Riddler, or maybe go all out and deliver on everybody's favorite final boss, Titan Joker. 1/6 scale Titan Joker? Clayface? Oh man, I mean, these guys, they're already starting to creep up there in regards to sizing with all 22 inches of those recent Venoms. And maybe Carnage in that regard from the Let There Be Carnage movie release. Why not do it with the Arkham-verse? Like I said, Clayface, Titan Joker, Bane, and don't even get me started on the vehicles. Arkham Asylum Batmobile, which I feel needs a little bit more representation. And if Jazz Inc. ain't gonna do it, Hot Toys, you guys are sitting on a gold mine there. Arkham Asylum Batmobile 1/6 scale, maybe to go along with this guy or whatever kind of revisit you guys got concocted. Arkham Knight Batmobile with tank functionality for this guy. Guys, if you make it right, people will pay it. If you build it, they will come. And it's with that principle that I thought to myself, if I say it, maybe they'll hear. And that's effectively what this video was going to be. It was never really going to be a full in-depth review of either of these figures. I didn't really want to cover all the accessories, all of the different hand inclusions, the hand accessories that I didn't really cover with the Arkham Silent version, as you can kind of note right there. But they kind of share a little bit of, like I said, cross-pollination in regards to what they were able to carry on over from here to here. It's just that both of these guys are just so removed from the current modern-day standards that Hot Toys put upon themselves that I think now would be a pretty ideal time, especially going into 2026, to revisit some of these versions, predominantly this guy, with the suggestions that I came up with, considering that, like I said, they elevated those qualities of the figures, that this guy just shows how far they've come in that time. And it would definitely fulfill not only my wishful thinking, but if I have those thoughts, those ideas, there's a good chunk of many other 1/6 scale collectors that are huge fans of the original first two Arkham games that will happily pay that price for some kind of deluxe 2.0 Arkham revisit from Hot Toys. And just kind of wanted to make a thematic video of conveying those thoughts and seeing exactly how many people maybe feel the same way, don't feel the same way, have some other kind of suggestions for Hot Toys to do a proper 2.0 of either of these guys, or maybe some other characters from the Arkham-verse, like some of the ones that I mentioned, Two-Face, Clayface, a lot of faces there, but also Bane, Poison Ivy. Again, Mr. Freeze with the mechanized suit. I mean, they love doing their suits. Recently, they revealed a Mr. Freeze from Batman and Robin. Who's to say that maybe they can't do him from Arkham-verse? If they're going to revisit Nightwing and pull that blueprint out of goddamn nowhere, who's to say that they can't do that with these other incarnations, or just kind of throw it back to this original 2009 version? That would be sick. And if you guys agree or don't agree, let me know down in the comment section below with this thematic video that I kind of wanted to just shoot the shit with and throw together. And if you enjoyed said video, hit the thumbs up button down below. And if you guys didn't, hit the thumbs down. And as always, guys, take care and stay humble. Peace out.